Welcome everybody, wherever you are, and welcome to this webinar, Global Adoption of eKYC and Biometric Authentication to Create Trust, hosted by Goode Intelligence in partnership with Daon, the Aite Group, Polarify, and SMFG. I hope you are all well and safe. My name is Alan Goode, and I'm the CEO of Goode Intelligence. I should be your host for today's summit and shall also be moderating the panel with a great line of experts later on. Some housekeeping points. Everyone except the speaker and panelists must be on mute. We will answer your questions at the end of the panel session. To ask a question, please use the Q&A facility. We will get through as many questions as we can, but we'll also make sure we stay on schedule so that the summit flows smoothly. We shall follow up with any unanswered questions after the event has finished. We'll be following up after the event with a link to the video recording of this event. We have an international lineup of speakers and panelists for today's event with presentations from Julie Conroy, Research Director at the Aite Group, and Jiro Matsuyama, General Manager of Polarify and SVP at SFMG. Joining Julie and Jiro later on our panel is Clive Bork, President of EMEA and APAC at Daon. So let's get started. Please let me introduce you to Julie Conroy, Research Director at the Aite Group. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you to everyone for giving us an hour of your valuable time today. I'm going to start out and just set the stage with some of the trends that we're seeing that are driving the global adoption of eKYC and biometric authentication. This is a hot topic of late. It's a question that we get from Aite Group's client base quite a bit as they're looking to evolve their control framework around customer onboarding. Aite Group, if you're not familiar with us, is a global research and consulting firm. We have experts across a variety of financial services verticals. And all of us sitting in the analyst seat at Aite Group come from industry. And so we have been in your seats making the tough decisions about how to spend precious investment dollars and where to get the biggest bang for your buck as you're trying to balance across compliance, risk mitigation, and the all-important customer experience. So as we dive into the research findings, and some of this research you are the first group to see, we actually haven't quite yet published some of this just yet. The pandemic has very much put the pedal to the metal on digital transformation for both good customers as well as attackers. And what we're seeing is since the pandemic hit in the first quarter of this year, most of the financial institutions and financial services firms that we have interviewed have seen a solid 250% increase in digital channel usage. At the same time, we're seeing that a lot of this increase is not just good customers, existing customers using those channels more, but it's a lot of folks that had traditionally been using the face-to-face channels, the branch, the ATM, and others, entering the digital environment really for the first time. Yeah, so these digital newbies are kind of learning as they go, and many bankers that I speak to are concerned that these folks pose an increased attack surface for organized crime rings because they're going to be more susceptible to things like social engineering and scams. And concurrently, we are definitely seeing increased application fraud attacks across the board. And there are a few drivers for these application fraud attacks. First, it's just as you see increased activity going through the digital channel, as you see increased volumes, fraudsters are going to try to lose their bad volume in the good. That always happens. But at the same time, we're also seeing that across the globe, as governments roll out stimulus programs and fraudsters find opportunity to defraud those, they're having to open up a lot of new accounts in order to exit those funds from the system. And that's really borne out by a survey that we performed last month we surveyed 20 North American financial institution fraud executives, and we asked them about the trends around application fraud and synthetic identity fraud attacks compared with the attack rates that they had been seeing prior to the pandemic. And as you can see here, the vast majority of those that we interviewed have seen a substantial spike in application fraud, in synthetic identity fraud, and a lot of it is tied to opening up accounts with identity theft in the actual customer's name, because as you're filing for unemployment on someone's behalf, you have to have a destination account that matches that name. Also, lots of mule accounts being opened up, because as fraud rings are stealing literally tens up to hundreds of billions of dollars from governments across the globe, it takes a robust mule network to exit those funds from the system. And while this survey data is North America, this is by no means limited to North America. These trends are very consistent, whether I'm talking to somebody in the UK or Australia or Asia Pac. The online has traditionally been the fraudster's favorite target. It's just consistently much easier to perpetrate your fraud attacks in that faceless environment. And in the fourth quarter or third quarter this year, as we surveyed financial institution executives at large US financial institutions, we asked them about what is their current account application fraud rate for each of the following channels: online, call center, branch, mobile. And as you can see, back in 2019, online certainly had the lion's share of the attack rate. And as you look at what that turned into with the pandemic hitting, as we asked them about what their application fraud rates in the current account product sector is looking like in 2020, online attacks have jumped up to 20% from a rate perspective. So again, it just underscores the fact that as we are seeing such a migration among good customers to these digital channels, the fraudsters are absolutely taking advantage of that as well. So recognizing that, we are seeing substantial investments on the horizon. And even as banks around the globe are having to tighten their belts because of the recession that is accompanying this pandemic, we are seeing that those types of technologies that can better enable digital channel usage are those that are retaining the priority. And in some cases, they're getting bumped up into the head of the queue from a prioritization perspective. Because as we have this much more digital first customer base, and as we're all forming new habits throughout this pandemic, we are seeing that those digital channel investments are so much more important from a strategic perspective. So in that same survey that we performed last month, we did ask the institutions how likely their firm is to engage in transforming, really making substantive changes versus small iterative tweaks to their application fraud risk control framework over the next year or two. And as you can see here, 80% of the institutions that we interviewed did say that they were very likely to do so. And as part of our ongoing research into new account risk assessments and eKYC, one of the follow-up questions that we asked was to ask about a variety of different technology types. Everything from identity verification to device identity. And one of the data points that really popped for me and I thought was very interesting was that as we specifically asked about eKYC technology and the ability to take that identity document, be it a driver's license or a passport, scan it in using the mobile device, and then use that data to authenticate the identity of the individual, leveraging the embedded capabilities and the embedded holograms, barcodes, what have you, and then also leveraging that capability set to help make the customer experience better, using the OCR capabilities to pre-populate application forms. So as we asked about a variety of different technologies, this one, as you can see, has 33% of the executives that we interviewed already in the process of adding this to their application fraud control framework. And another 47% have it on the 1 to 2 year roadmap. And one of the other interesting things that came up in a number of the discussions was a couple of the executives likened this technology to a Swiss Army knife, because while it's really effective at the time of onboarding, it also has the benefit of being beneficial later on in the control framework, and you can use it for things like stepped-up authentication for high-risk transactions. And so, from an investment perspective, that's always very attractive as well. As we look at some of the business case drivers and what is enabling the investment in additional elements of the control framework, especially during a time of recession, we asked about the prioritization and what is driving those business cases. And as you can see here, improving that customer onboarding experience surfaced as one of the top business case drivers for executives. That wasn't a big surprise. That pretty consistently, as we interview risk executives over the years about what is enabling their evolution of their control framework, those risk executives anymore feel like they've got two hats with equal weight. One is the traditional hat of mitigating the risk, stopping the bad guys, complying with global regulation. But the other is really making sure that as you're deploying technology to do so, you're not interfering with that customer experience overly. And ideally, you are improving the customer onboarding experience. Detecting fraud was certainly another important driver to the business case. And it's interesting, again, we asked this question a lot. The past couple of years that we've asked this, lowering back office costs was a factor, but it was kind of a distant third. And again, as we're in this global recession, we are seeing that technologies that can create greater operational efficiencies are increasingly important to the executives that we survey. And really, as you look at the opportunity to deploy new technology, if you have something that can improve security, improve the customer experience, and improve operational efficiency concurrently, that's a win-win-win that really does make that business case so much easier to get across the finish line. And as we look at this additional and increasing adoption of eKYC types of technologies by institutions across the globe, we're seeing that the shifting regulatory landscape is another key driver and enabler here. In some cases, as in Japan, we're seeing that regulations that had previously been a little bit of an obstacle to engaging with these technologies have been amended to permit the use of remote identity document authentication, which replaced a process that really had really high attrition before because it was so manually intensive, it was so onerous on that end consumer. In other cases, such as in Hong Kong, we're seeing that guidance is being released that requires the use of this technology. The UK is another example of that requirement when you're doing 100% digital onboarding of a new customer. And then, there's other places on the globe, such as Europe, where we have a bit of a confusing patchwork of regulation that has been emerging, where the fourth money laundering directive in the EU specifies that the member states are those responsible for setting forth the KYC regulations. And so, as I said earlier, in the UK, the remote document identification is permitted and even required for some use cases. Whereas in Germany, you still have to do a live video interaction. And in Hungary, they recently, just in 2019, passed legislation that does permit eKYC for the first time. And so this is something that we are keeping tabs on. It's, as you can see by the recency with many of these regulations on the screen, it's a rapidly shifting regulatory landscape, but we definitely are seeing it shift in the direction of recommendations that this type of technology be used to enable more secure and less friction-filled onboarding experiences for this increasing population of consumers that are coming on board remotely. So as we look at, just some of the key takeaways from this bit of research that I've shared, I think application fraud will absolutely continue to accelerate for the foreseeable future, fueled both by our extreme digital first population, as well as the fact that we are all forming new habits that are going to stick on the back end of this. And so we're going to emerge from a much more digitally centric population than we entered with. And while balancing minimal friction to the customer experience with risk mitigation and compliance, that's going to be really required and key business case drivers to fuel a better digital experience and a more secure digital experience for financial services firms and their customers. And as you look at the ways to do this, eKYC technologies are really forming a critical underpinning of that framework for a lot of the institutions that we are speaking with. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Jiro, and he's going to share his kind of frontline perspective on this topic.
Thank you, Jerry. Hi, this is Jiro. I'm sharing the document. Hold on a second. Okay, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I'm really happy to present our product and the Japanese market trend of eKYC and biometric authentication today. So today I will show you our eKYC service and the cloud-based biometric authentication service and how important the combination of those two services is. Let's look at the company's profile quickly. So Polarify is the company spin off from the Sumitomo Financial Group, it's known as SMFG, which is one of the globally systematically important banks. And then SMFG's total asset is more than 200 trillion JPY. So since 2014, SMFG was looking for the new technology to create a new market with the strong affinity for the banking business. So I have the double title from the Polarify and SMFG, and then SMFG researched the artificial intelligence, AI, the blockchain, and then biometric authentication. So finally, we have met with Daon in 2016, and everything's were moving forward so smoothly and quickly. So then at the end, May 2017. Okay. Oh, this is something I should say, sorry. Should I continue this? Hold a second. Okay, can you see my slide? I don't know who can answer this, but.
Hi, Jiro. Yes, we can.
Okay. Where am I? Yes, finally, so May 2017, SMSG and Daon established the Polarify. So from here, I will present our eKYC service. So our eKYC service is already contracted more than 40 clients since 2019. And it is processing the 5 million transactions per year. The reason we have such many clients in such short period is, first of all, the regulation has been changed, and eKYC was accepted by the law on November 2018. So many financial institutions intend to implement the eKYC. And then second of all, fortunately, we have the Daon's face matching engine and the liveness check function so that we can quickly develop our eKYC service adapted the Japanese regulation. So since those two functions, face matching engine and the liveness check is very high accurate, it makes us the unique and strong position in the market. And then our major clients are like Rakuten Security, PayPay, it's the QR payment service, and then SoftBank and so SMBC and so on. So this slide shows the detail of the eKYC service. So this is just an example of entire onboarding process, and then usually it starts the obtaining user acceptance page at the client side, and the next step would be the create user profile, and then third step is usually to upload the ID document. But in eKYC, it is to capture the image of ID document, and then selfie and the liveness. So the image of ID document and the selfie must be captured in real-time basis. This is a key point of the regulation of the eKYC. So images which taken in the past are not allowed. So that is the point. And then after the eKYC is done, so the rest of the processes, there are some remaining process here, like confirm the trading purpose or choose the design of the cash card or credit card, something like that. So in the next slide, I will show you the demo movie of the eKYC. It is the actual account opening website of the Rakuten Security, who is the one of our client. And then this is the actual user operation. So I promise that I do not process or tweak or change anything to make it looking better. So first screen is to choose the type of ID documents, like a driver's license, tax ID card. And then next few screens showing the guidance. From here, this screen is to capture the front image of the ID document. We developed the auto shutter function, so the image is automatically taken at the best shot. So next screen is to capture the tilted image of ID document. This is very unique regulatory requirement in Japan. The next one is to capture the back image of the ID. This one is the auto shutter. And the next one is to capture the selfie. Oh, this is my face. And the last step is to do the liveness check. We use the 3D face liveness function, which is provided by Daon. So this is all steps of the eKYC here in Japan. So what are the benefits for the clients? I always ask our client, what is the benefit for you, and then why you choose Polarify. And then the 5 listed points are the major one from our clients. The first one is the cost cutting. So before eKYC, financial servicer has to send an untransferable mail to user's address to confirm their residency, which costs $3 to $5 per mail. After eKYC, the mail is no longer necessary. And then eKYC cost around $1 per transaction. So which means $2 to $4 is can be cut. Then next to second and the third point is like the one set, one unit. So shortening of account opening lead time and then improvement of completion rate. So sending mail to user's address takes like 3 to 7 business days before eKYC. But eKYC enables our clients to complete all KYC operations in the day, and the user can start using the client's financial service in the same day. It results in the improvement of account opening completion rate. One of our clients told me that they confirmed 25% improvement of the fast login ratio after eKYC implementation. So then the fourth point is strengthening of the fraud prevention. So capturing selfie and the liveness check is, I think, the highest prevention method from fraud. So what criminals unlike the most is to leave the selfie image that can be tracked. And the liveness check function is to protect from spoofing. So the combination of selfie capturing and the liveness check is the best way at this moment. That's I strongly believe. And then fifth point is contactless operation. As you know, so for users, for employees, contactless operation is becoming a new normal after COVID. So user doesn't want to go to Terra window to open an account or do any other transactions at this moment. So financial services needs to be changed their service method from face-to-face to the contactless. So then at the next slide, let me show you how many clients is to start using eKYC during COVID at 22 clients live in production since March during the COVID crisis. Actually, all our clients who already implemented our eKYC is 25, which means the 22 out of 25 clients have started using eKYC during the COVID. So that's all about our eKYC. From next slide, I will present the cloud-based biometric authentication. So we are now developing and will release cloud-based biometric authentication service by end of this year. Actually, we call it as cloud-based face authentication instead of the biometric. And then we already have some clients who decided to use this service. So this service can work alone, but I strongly recommend our clients to use it in combination with eKYC, because through the account opening and the KYC process, the face data captured by eKYC is confirmed to match with face image of ID document. So I think this is the most secure and the highest trust level as user's credential. And then, as you might be able to imagine easily, since the face data is stored in cloud, this authentication service is device-free. So it can be used a bunch of use cases of online and offline. So online use cases are like account access from new device, remittance, and payment. And then offline use cases are like ATM, payment, transportation, office entrance, and so on. So next slide is another demo for the face authentication. But I will not comment anything at this time. That's it. So I can sense that some of you think it is too simple, too usual. So to be honest with you, I did hesitate to use this demo movie first because there's no surprise and no impression here. But I realized that simple but secure is important message. I think I should remind you that the face data is confirmed much with ID documents through eKYC, very trusted credential. And then another important thing I should mention is that the liveness check. So person in the video is blinking. This is a liveness check to prevent from spoofing. I don't touch the detailed technique and the method how to detect the spoofing, but it is very accurate. So facial authentication with trusted credential and a very accurate spoofing detection with simple user interface is ready for your customer. So that's what are we waiting for? That's my message on this slide. So this is the last slide, and then it shows the summary and the key message of my presentation. So first point is the combination of eKYC and biometric authentication creates stronger trust and then silo functions and data. So second point is the use of eKYC could initiate the registration of service-side facial credential. And then authentication data on cloud can be used for the various use cases. I recommend our clients to use this combination for high-risk operation or transactions, like the account access, especially the first access from new device, step-up transaction approval for the high-risk transaction, and account recovery, and so on. So third point is the eKYC can be recalled at any stage when necessary. So for example, so when existing customers do like they change the address, change the device, or their ID document expired, so you can recall the eKYC to obtain their ID document again. At the same time, the face data can be refreshed, so you can keep up-to-date credential data. So that's all presentation from me. Thank you very much for your kind attention. So if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. I'll get back to you, Alan.
Thank you, Jiro, and especially as it's late in the day for you in Japan. So I believe that our two keynote presentations today have provided some great insights into some of the important dynamics of eKYC and biometric authentication. I'm sure you have plenty of questions to ask our panelists. Just a reminder that we're using the Q&A tool on Zoom today, not the hand up. So if you've got any questions, and we've had plenty of them come in already, please use the Q&A tool. So in addition to the two presenters that I'd like to invite back, I'd like to ask Clive Bork, President of EMEA and APAC at Daon, who's already here, good to see, to join us. So if we can all join, and what we'll do, we'll go into the Q&A session. So just a reminder, use the Q&A session for the questions. Let me just check. Fantastic. Right, I'd like to ask Julie this question first. As eKYC proliferates, what are you hearing as key benefits and lessons learned?
So I think in terms of key benefits, certainly it goes back to some of those benefits and business case drivers I talked about at the outset, which is really the ability to streamline, create operational efficiencies, make it easier for somebody to onboard leveraging that mobile channel. And then also, I'm hearing operational benefits on the back end. So you have a lower incidence of fat finger errors and other things that drive operational exceptions. And so there's a strong operational efficiency component. I would say some of the lessons learned are just some of the education of the client base and make sure as you are deploying this into your digital channels that you do have some very effective and concise prompts and guidance for the customer to make sure that they understand how to use it properly. Clive, you might have some other thoughts there. I know you guys have kind of the bird's eye view there.
Yeah, no, thanks, Julie. And I would agree with the things you said there and during your presentation. What we found during the COVID crisis was that actually remote onboarding was the only channel for certain customers to acquire new customers. So, you know, some of the issue was you couldn't bring people into branches anymore. So it was really the only way to get customers and to acquire new customers. We also saw, you know, a significant uptick. Like one of our customers saw a threefold uptick this year compared to last year in the digital channel onboarding process. Others saw even greater growth and also saw various fluctuations by month depending on the types of restrictions that were being announced or unannounced and so on. So depending on the restrictions in the jurisdiction, people would veer more into digital or get back into both channels or whatever. In terms of lessons learned, one of the things we found was every step in the process has a drop-off rate, so that's really important. However, trying to reduce the steps and combining too many things into the same step is also an issue as well. And then the last thing that we learned was you need a catch-all process. So what Jira presented was pretty slick and that was great. But for people who, for whatever reason, their documents have expired or they're having trouble with their phone or their usability is not for them or whatever, you need to have a catch-all simpler process so you can at least gather those as well. But in getting the catch-all process, it's important not to sink the lowest common denominator. So take advantage of the tools where there are. One of the things I saw there is people taking advantage of NFC. So now with the adoption of NFC and the availability of it, I'm sure we'll talk about it more in the Q&A, it's kind of, it's not a silver bullet, but it's a significant accelerant in getting high quality data and getting secure identification of people in the remote onboarding process.
So Clive, just to kind of emphasize, the NFC you're talking about is when you read a biometric passport or a biometric ID card using NFC to extract the data which is stored on the chip.
That's exactly it. So traditionally we would have scanned the surface of the document, and now we can use the NFC capabilities on the smartphone, both Apple and Android, because Apple made a change last year that enabled that. So now we can read the data from the chip when the chip exists and when the chip is accessible in terms of the security of the chip. But in terms of reading the data from the chip, we can get the data from the chip without any of the OCR errors from reading the surface, but also we can securely check that that document was issued from the public certificate of the authority that issued it, which is a great benefit in that sense as well. You still can read the surface of the document and compare both data and so on, so you can look for tamper evidence in that way as well.
Yep, fantastic. I've got a question specifically for Julie here from Luke. He's great presentation. Do you have similar data for Africa?
So good question, Luke. Yeah, as we look at the regulatory landscape that is evolving in Africa, I think right now what we're seeing is that the movement towards eKYC is a bit more market driven than being influenced by regulation. Yeah, I think that regulators right now are a little bit reluctant to put any sort of mandate in place for eKYC, just because they're also very concerned about financial inclusion. And there's still a healthy population in Africa that don't have an identity document. But that said, I think, from a market-driven perspective, we've seen, some of the MNOs deploy this as a means of both KYC and fraud mitigation as they're enabling things like mobile money. And so we're definitely seeing it come into the ecosystem in that way.
Excellent. Thanks, Julie. A question for Clive, and I think this is related to Jiro's second piece of his presentation on the demo. In what scenarios do you see the convergence of eKYC and biometric authentication, and how does it work in the real world?
Well, I think Jiro pretty much covered that in the sense that there's two aspects to it. One is as you're doing eKYC, it's an opportunity to set up a credential. So you can register the face and then use the face as an authenticator. That face can then be used for downstream authentication, can be used for step-up authentication, can be used in risky transactions. If someone onboards through a mobile app, so you can do in Polarify through a web page or in a mobile app, but if they're doing an onboarding through a mobile app, you can also create a device authenticator as well, and silently register the device authenticator on the device, so you can then do multi-factor authentication, a combination of the device and the face later as well. Then in terms of having availability of the two tool sets, let's say through APIs or whatever, you can imagine a user journey where somebody's an existing customer, but their document is expired, as Jira talked about. Then the ability to do a refresh of the AML or KYC as the person logs onto their digital banking, and then trigger the journey to capture the ID documentation again. So that's where we see the convergence is both in terms of the value is setting up another authenticator, but also then the fact that the two tool sets or capabilities are available. You can kind of mix and interchange them depending on your requirements. Also from a risk perspective, if you're upgrading someone from one set of authentication capabilities to another, you could choose to say, well, giving them a stronger credential requires me to do additional proofing. There's another example where you might go back and recall the KYC or the document ID check.
Okay. Anyone else like to add to Clive's comments, please? No, it's fine. Thank you. So I've got a question.
I think you covered it well.
Jiro.
Yeah, he covered it well. And this is what I think. So I think that when the company and the user realize that the most trusted credential is the face data, confirmed to match the ID document. That's the people realize this is the way to they should use the combination with the eKYC and the biometric authentication. And then here in Japan, so as I mentioned in the presentation, so once eKYC is accepted, allowed by the AML regulation, so and many financial institutions have implemented eKYC, then their attention is moving to more secure authentication by using the face, which is registered by eKYC. That's the trend in Japan right now.
Okay, good point. We got a question from someone from the audience, from David Spinks. He says, I have yet to see any financial services organizations admit to any degree of synthetic identity within their own customer base. What is your experience of this?
That's a good question. I can jump in here first. I think the level of concern and attention paid to synthetics really varies quite widely from country to country. Unfortunately, here in the US, I think we have one of the most acute problems because it's relatively easy to establish a synthetic identity in our system. And so I actually do see a lot of financial institutions beginning to shine a pretty bright light on that problem. As I talk to folks in other markets, such as, Australia, not a huge problem with synthetics there because the front end KYC process is much more rigorous and it's much more difficult to establish a synthetic identity in the Australian market. In the UK, I think it falls somewhere in between. I think that there is definitely an awareness, and actually I think the UK in some cases did a better job than many countries because we saw the credit risk and the fraud folks at many of the large banks partnering pretty early to get their arms around the problem. So it really is a problem that manifests very differently country by country, depending on how the credit establishment and whether you have a central source of truth from a national identity perspective.
Good point.
And I think Julie's answers are pretty comprehensive. What we've observed is that some of our customers have detected synthetic identities during the application process, which would lead you to conclude that some went through undetected, but nobody publicly is going to say, well, we've allowed synthetic identities to be used to create accounts and so on. But what has happened, as Julie pointed out from a spotlight perspective, is after an account is created, it's then how you manage the risk on that account and how you monitor that account try and detect if there's something wrong with that account other than a genuine one.
Yeah, and that kind of gets into like traditional KYC and AML kind of solutions and linked to the fraud.
Well, one of the things that
management.
people do in some jurisdictions is they link out to a trusted source. So there are trusted sources through the Attorney General's office in Australia. There are trusted sources in other countries where you can, in South Africa, for example, and some of those trusted sources are biographic and some of them are biometric. So in Africa, a lot of the countries, there is an API for national identity database, and you can do a biometric face verification against that. But those are also all the other credit rating / data houses where you can do the PEP sanctions, identity verification and AML checks. So when you don't have a trusted source, what you do is you use external data checks and then run rules over the results, like these external data checks matched, the liveness was strong, the biometric match was strong, this is what we found in the document liveness storing, and so on and so forth. So it's a whole rules risk-based system.
Okay, thank you. Right, quickly on to our next question, and I'm going to ask Jiro this one first. What are the important functional items of eKYC when we choose?
This is the accuracy of the face matching engine and the liveness check function. I think that both functions are key factors to success the eKYC project, because their face image of ID document is sometimes very low resolution. So, so accuracy, high spec of their face matching engine is required. Otherwise, there is so many unmatched result we have, and the user doesn't. We can't get the user sufficient because the most of the application is denied. So, and then the liveness check is the another key factor, because that function is to prevent the spoofing. So if this function is low accuracy, low spec, then you will have the big problem with your compliance department to persuade to approve the project. That's what I think. Yep.
Thank you. Clive, do you want to add anything else?
Well, I would say that there's a couple of other things that if you're starting at a greenfield, one of those, which channels are you going to allow the acquisition to happen through? So hopefully you can do both app-based, browser-based, and branch-based, and allow someone to start in one channel and complete in another channel. And that really helps be as inclusive as possible. Another aspect is not everybody will go through the same journey. So while we'll have high completion rates and straight-through processing for a high volume of IDs, there'll obviously be situations where something will be flagged for review. So you need to be able to have different workflows and then ways to resolve some of those workflows without huge effort by the user. So for example, you might go back to them and say, the scan of your document wasn't very clear, or the documents you used were expiring too soon or whatever. But then equally, you have some which you need to report for fraud and say, this looks like a fraudulent application and so on. So the ability to have multi-channel, the ability to run different rules over different applications, and then the ability to review the journey that's been gone through and decide how to action it from a user perspective. So you can bring in the genuine users as many as possible and get those completion rates up. Those are kind of the functional. There's more to it, but that's at a high level.
Okay, thank you. And related to what Jiro just said, there's a question coming from Gareth who said, did you demonstrate a passive liveness test, or was this an active?
It was both. It was actually a combination of both. So, so typically what we would always advocate is a combination of active and passive liveness. And then as Jiro talked about, there's different types of liveness. So depending on the use case and the risk in the scenario, you can go with very strong active liveness checks where the passive is turned up, the active is turned up, or you can go with very small active and passive where they're kind of tuned down for lower friction. So it depends on whether you're doing a multi-factor authentication or a brand new customer from a brand new device for the first time and so on. You can basically mix it up.
Okay, thank you. A question here from Jane Gamble, and she asked, are there any issues that have been experienced by any of you when integrating such mobile channels to legacy systems? And also, are there any pitfalls that can be avoided?
So integrating into the mobile channels and into legacy systems, there definitely are. So it depends on how the mobile app's been built in the first place, whether you can take advantage of some of the latest techniques. Then some of the development frameworks are tried to, some of the mobile development frameworks are done to try and produce code once and publish on multiple platforms. That can make it a little bit harder to integrate, but they're still doable. In terms of with legacy systems, it's really great if you can actually link into the existing data within your organization as part of the validation process. So if you can do that, that's great. Also, if you can leverage the existing account opening infrastructure, which probably already reaches out to those external identity sources, then that also, allows you to fast track the implementation. I think that's the answer to the question. Julie, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think it's a good question and one that comes up a lot when you have kind of your, older legacy platforms and you're trying to tack on a new capability set. But again, to your point, just if you have the API infrastructure that can facilitate that, then it can be mostly seamless.
One of the reasons we saw people going with browser-based was that challenge. So difficult to get stuff directly into the mobile platform as it is today. So you can more quickly get to market with customer acquisition through a web browser. And you can acquire customers and do a lot of all the eKYC, document capture, liveness, and so on the same backend process, but using the web browser as the front end. So sometimes that's an alternative. And we've seen customers start with the intention of building it seamlessly into their mobile app-based frameworks and the mobile app itself to their customers, and then actually change tack and move to web browser for quicker time to market.
Thank you. I've got two questions, and they're kind of both related, really. One from Ralph Rodriguez and one from Tomohiro Wada, and it's about counterfeit ID. So how do you prevent digital spoofing of an ID document? So how do you detect and thwart?
So it's a really great question. It's one of the topics of the day. So the first thing is that there are, compared to a couple of years ago, there are some techniques now which you can use to detect some counterfeit when you're doing surface-based detection. However, they don't generalize across all ID documents. And at the end of the day, with enough time, effort, and money, a fraudster will be able to create a high-quality document. And also, I saw in the Q&A somebody asking a question about, can I buy? You can actually go online and buy, an Australian driver's license or whatever. So you can only get so far with the technology, and it doesn't work for all the documents. Depending on the document types. And some document types, like the guy from Green Book, is a paper-based document with a laminate and a barcode. So it really depends on the document types, what you're looking for. The typical things you're looking for is color photocopy detection, black and white photocopy detection. So you can do that to a degree, which is great. Photo substitution, you can only do that to a degree. It doesn't work for all documents. It depends, and so on. And then there's various other checks you can do, like inconsistency of the data. One reason why people love NFC is if there's a chip and you can NFC the chip, it takes all those issues away, because you can actually securely read the chip. You can check the signature on the data. You have a much higher degree of confidence. So, but not all documents have chips, and NFC is not going to be a solution across the globe for everybody, for every use case. So what you have to try and do then is basically incorporate technical reviews, and in some cases manual reviews. The other thing is we have this concept of fool a system once but don't fool it twice. So what we can do is when we detect fraud, we can register that fraud or profile, device or face biometric, and then during subsequent applications look for those and get a hit against fraud lists. So in the same way that in call centers people have a list of fraudsters' voices that they check the caller records against, you can do the same in the KYC process using facial recognition, or looking for same devices coming back with multiple applications in a period and so on. So there's no silver bullet here. And then the important thing is to actually understand the risk. And one of the things that kind of surprises people is that creating doing a surface capture of an ID document creates the impression that you have a silver bullet, that's you can do a high quality recognition of that. You can do high quality recognition of that, but you can't absolutely say that that document's not spoofed without NFC.
Yep, good answer. And as someone who used to work for a passport manufacturer, I can definitely kind of concur with what Clive said. I think it's to end today's session. I think it's been a really excellent one. It's one of these kind of future kind of questions. It's looking into the crystal ball. So, in looking into the crystal ball, how do you see the eKYC landscape evolving over the next 1 to 2 years? So, I'll ask Julie that first.
So based on the momentum that we're seeing and the accelerants that the pandemic will result in, I think we will see greatly increasing adoption across a variety of different financial services and money services businesses use cases. I think we're also seeing that, you know, it's not just the fraud driver, it's not just the risk driver, the customer experience. We're seeing regulators come on board with this as well as they get more comfortable with the innovation. And as I said in my comments, you know, in some cases, we're actually seeing regulators drive this momentum. And so this is one technology I think we're going to see. I'm very bullish on its adoption, even during a tough economic time.
Thank you. Clive?
I suppose I see NFC as the big game changer at the moment, where that's actually disrupting a lot of the ways we think about and do this. But like I said, it's not a panacea to solve everything. I think KYC as a service, which Giro and Polarify are doing, you know, I think we're going to see that emerge in a lot of jurisdictions where there'll be a number of trusted providers who can do that. And finally, I think identity as a utility is the long-term game. So possibly using DLT and blockchain technologies, self-sovereign ID and all those things. But in the longer term, potentially identity is furnished, is serviced from some sort of identity utility.
And Jiro, anything from Japan that you can add in terms of what we will see in the next 2 years in this market?
Actually, so in terms of the eKYC here in Japan, so it's already more than 100 financial institutions implemented the eKYC. So it's already started. So I think they're 1 to 2 years. So I think their attention will move to your next phase, which is I think the authentication, more secure authentication by using the face data captured in the eKYC. I think that's gonna be the normal authentication method in 2 or 3 years.
Okay, that does seem an obvious kind of conclusion to this. So, Michelle, can you bring up the final closing slide, please? Because it's at 3 p.m. I'd like to thank all of our speakers and panelists for joining us today and sharing their insight and expertise with us. I hope you've all taken away something of value from today's virtual meeting. If we didn't manage to get around to answering any of your questions, and I know there's quite a few that we didn't have time to answer today, then we should be following up with all of them to ensure that you get an answer. And the recording from today's summit will be available shortly, and we will be in touch with the details in how to access this recording. On that note, I would like to thank all of you for attending. Stay safe and well. Thank you.